All right, well, hello there. Happy Thursday, happy sketch session day. I'm so glad you found your way to your drawing board, table, sketchbook, whatever it is that you have in front of you, and whatever you are committed to draw on. I'm happy you got it in front of you, and I'm happy you're drawing with me tonight or whenever you're catching this recording. Okay, I'm seeing myself live, so that's always good news. So I have something really fun planned for us tonight. One of the things I love to do, but I haven't done in a long time, so I'm a little bit nervous because I've been focusing so much on drawing with line recently. So tonight we're switching over and we're going to be only using value. Well, hello Ted, good to see you. Glad you're here drawing with me. Hope is it Trish is with you as well. Anyways, so if you're here and you're catching this video for the first time, let me introduce myself real briefly. My name is Carolyn Hozak Peters. I would usually go by Carolyn Peters in the art world. And I own Cura Studios, which is where I teach classical drawing skills to artists who want to have a solid footing to explore their creative voice from. And every week I come here to YouTube and I spend an hour with you and we draw together. And every week I have subject matter that we draw from, and that subject matter rotates on a 4-week cycle. So we go figure, portrait, animals, and then inanimate things. And with every subject matter I put a spin onto it, like there's a lesson in there. And so in my mind it's the perfect place that combines a place where you can get a workout for your drawing skills, so something where you work and where you stretch yourself and you improve, and you mix it up with a place you come to relax, to unwind, to tap into your creativity. And as I always like to say, it's like a sliding scale, and you choose wherever you're at today in this moment. Do you need to unwind? You just need to relax? Then draw in whatever way makes you happy. But if you're ready to do some heavy lifting, then follow my prompts. And to get the most out of these sessions, I do encourage you, don't just listen to my lesson in the beginning. Actually have your pencils with you and draw along with me. Even better, come back after the live is done, pause on one of the images, and then play around with the ideas that you have absorbed during the lesson. But it's in the doing that you'll grow, not just in the listening. Okay, so enough on that. Okay, great. So Trish is here too, and Chris is here. Excellent. So happy everybody's ready and, ready for some drawing time. Tonight's lesson will be on tone. So tone is another way of saying value. And what the heck is value and tone? A layman's way of saying it is, it's the degrees of lightness and darkness that our eyes can see. Now, if you go back through all the live videos we've been doing together, most of the times we've been using mainly lines. We've been using lines and angles and shapes. And hey, Lynn, good to see you. And we've been constructing our drawings like that, focusing on linear structure, planar structure. And I want you to have that information in the back of your heads. You're not throwing that out tonight, but we're not going to use any lines tonight. Can you believe it? Well, maybe just a little bit, but the main focus will be on, well, how do we draw, but just using value, like smudging or shading, as people who don't know the lingo quite yet like to call it. So a couple of pointers ahead of us jumping in. When you work with shading, it's really important that you know your tools. So in the Instagram call to action that we're going to draw in tone tonight, I made sure that people knew to bring charcoal. If you don't have charcoal with you, don't worry about it, but it is good to know that different tools will yield different results, and different tools are good for certain things and not so good for other things. So if you want to create a portrait in tone, based on tone, you want to have a material that will let you create gradations very easily, very effortlessly, that will let you make broad marks very easily. Like if you have, let's say, a marker with a 0.1 tip on it, that's going to be really hard to create tone with, right? So for example, I keep looking over here because I have my tools over here. I don't know if you can see this. Let's put it over here. You might have seen these little charcoal blocks before. And I'll show you the brand too, because there are different types. So this is the brand I usually buy. It's called Art Alternatives. It's very inexpensive, and it's called compressed charcoal. The reason why I'm saying this is because there are other blocks like this. They're called Conte blocks, and that's a very different medium. Conte has clay in it, and that makes it really hard to erase. These guys here, they're very powdery. So once you make a mark with them, they kind of, diffuse, and they're very easy to erase. If you don't have this, which is very likely, here's something else you can have. If you just have a block of graphite, that might work really well. The reason why this is so good is because you can use the whole edge to draw with, and you'll see it once we jump into the drawing. If you only have one of these guys here, one of those charcoal pencils, perfect. Do pay attention though to the back here. So on the back it'll say what hardness it is. So if you have an HB, that's a fairly hard charcoal. If you have a medium or a soft, I would use the soft one for the method that I'm explaining today. And if you say, well, I don't have any charcoal, Carolyn, then you just grab the softest graphite pencil that you have. So if you don't know how to gauge that, again, on the back of your pencils, there are usually numbers back here. So HB is middle of the road, it's a medium softness. If you go into the H's, like a 2H, a 4H, a 6H, they get really hard. You don't want to draw with that tonight. So you want to have one of the B pencils, like a 4B or a 6B, and you want to create a long tip on it and use that whole length of the tip of it on it. So, but the pencils are only one part of the equation, right? Because you gotta put that pencil mark onto something. So you need the right kind of paper. Like they're kind of like a couple dancing together. They have to harmonize in order to give you good results. And some couples just don't dance that well together. So you wanna have a paper that's really slick to the touch. Anything that has a lot of grain and is bumpy, it's made that way so it would grab the charcoal and not let it go anymore. So, and for some things you want that, but for the method I'm teaching you tonight, that might get in your way. And again, if you don't have any of those fancy tools, practice along anyways. Make your experiences, or gather your experiences, learn from them, and then next time you try this method out on the smooth paper with the right tools, you're just gonna feel like, oh my God, I've arrived in heaven. if this method is working for you. So that's the first thing. Test out your tools, know what you're working with. Also, last thing I'll say about tools is make sure your paper is padded. So you don't just want to have a single sheet of paper on a wooden board, because that will be hard to control the softness of your marks. All right, let's roll into point number 2. Point number 2, instead of working and focusing on lines and outer contours and edges, you only want to think in shapes today. Think and work in shapes. Now here's a little tip how to do this. The way you do it is you squint and you kind of try and zoom out a lot when you look at the portrait. So rather than focusing in on the person's nose, you want to keep yourself always zooming out, squinting, and then asking yourself, what kind of shape am I dealing with? And as you're working in shapes, and again, much of this will become much more clear once I actually draw, but I do want to preface things. There are good shapes and bad shapes. Bad shapes are blobby shapes, shapes that only have rounded edges. They're just kind of squishy, amorphous. You want to have structured shapes. And the way you structure your shapes is through straight edges. And again, I'll demonstrate that later. Number 3, so we are building in shapes, or we're starting with shapes, and then we will erase our lights. And how do we do this? Again, we need the right tools for this. This here is called a kneaded eraser. I love it because you can squish it into the shape that you need it to. It's very soft. It won't rip your paper up like crazy. You can make it into a fine little point or edge. Really, really good tool to have. If you don't have one, don't worry about it. You just use whatever eraser you have. But what I recommend is that you grab a straight edge or an X-Acto blade and you kind of cut off an edge to get a really clean edge to work with. You know how like when you erase too much, like your eraser kind of rounds off its edges? So if you just chop a piece of the eraser off, you have a really sharp edge to work with and you can erase it very precisely. And another tool that I love for this method is just a pencil eraser. So this looks like a ballpoint pen, but it's actually an eraser on the tip, and that's something I'll be using today. Alrighty, so we're using these erasers to erase our lights. And like that, if drawing linearly is a challenge for you, this might be like the best thing that ever happened to you, because it'll feel like you're painting. And when you paint, you usually work with shapes. So some people will hate this method because they're line-driven people, and some people will love this method because they're shape-driven people, and some people fall in the middle. And so for me personally, I always love this method. Next point, we will work general to specific. So begin with the biggest shapes and then work in smaller, 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 and smaller shapes. Nothing new about that. That's usually always the rule we follow. And then the last thing that will become more clear as we draw, you want to give these shapes that you're recording a variety of edges. So I'll come back to that point, but I did want to preface that. All right, so let me draw up the reference images for us and we'll get going. Just need to reach over here, transition. Okay, so this is my friend Nick, and he graciously allowed me to use his image. And so I'm using this block to begin with, and the way, blanking on the word I was using, the way I'm beginning is I'm basically using the edge of this block and I'm massing in the silhouette. So this is, as I said, as I tried to warn you, this is a very different way of drawing than we have been. This is a completely shape-based way where we do not work in lines. So this is what I'll show you real quick what my students usually do when I introduce this method to them. They'll do this. They find the corner of their little blocks, like they'll work around and they find the corner of this block, and then they outline it, and then they find their little lines that they're used to, and then maybe later they'll shade in a little bit. This is kind of besides the point, or like it's kind of, you're not getting the benefit of this method if you work this way. Just, if this is really how you want to work, just grab a pencil. Instead, you want to use the whole side of your charcoal blocks, and you want to capture that silhouette. And so to capture your silhouette in the best way, as I said, you want to squint. And just so you know how long we'll have for these, I have 3 images for us tonight. The first one I'll keep at 10 minutes, so like 53, just to warm us up. So maybe just watch this one, and then we'll do 2 more. And as you feel like, oh, I get it, I see what she's doing here, then you can jump in and draw along. If you've done this method before, by all means, jump in, have fun. So let's talk about how to make these shapes good shapes instead of bad shapes. So I mentioned earlier, right? So we want to make sure everything is angled, because we want to have a precise shape, not a blobby shape. And blobby shapes happen when we only rely on curves. So I'm getting used to holding this block, and you want to break your block into smaller pieces, because that will allow you more versatility. And so notice I'm leaving everything pretty big and vague, like I'm not getting in there with small shapes yet. So that's a general to specific thing. So this is my silhouette. Doesn't look like much, right? But I was being careful when I recorded it. And so now I'm getting into I'm squinting. So this is always what I come back to tonight. I'm squinting and I'm starting to record that shadow that's being cast by his baseball hat. And I'm paying really close attention to what kind of shape it creates as it's falling. I'm also not pushing really hard when I'm making my marks. At least not yet, because I'm still in the kind of beginning phase of the drawing. And so I'm not using lines to create the edge of the portrait, but I am using the shapes around it. So I'm here, for example, I'm using the shape created by the jacket to help me find where the edge of the face is. I can use the background here. And you can make this up, like if there's a light background behind the model, just pretend like there's a dark background. You can use this and say, okay, I'm creating the edge by creating the background. I'm going to scoot this over so you can see. All right, so as always, I like to work in phases. So this would be my phase one. Phase one is complete when I have my silhouette and this biggest shadow pattern that I see. You know what? And since he has this very dominant mustache, which is a dark local value, I'm going to add that in as well. So I just grabbed a slightly smaller piece because it's a smaller shape that I'm dealing with. So there's no point in suffering needlessly with this gigantic block that you're holding. But it's kind of like the same with painting. You always want to use the biggest brush for the job because it forces you to stay general. And that working in general shapes in the beginning allows you to get the big picture right in the beginning. Okay, so what you're just seeing me do is I'm using my hand and I just kind of lightly wipe the whole thing. If you don't like getting your fingers all dirty like this, maybe just grab a paper towel and kind of dust over it. What that does, it kind of unifies your drawing. Now what I don't mean is I don't want you to grab this and start rubbing here. I don't want you to ingrain it into the pores. I just lightly want you to kind of dust over this. Okay, so here comes the next phase. In the next phase, I am using my kneaded eraser and I'm starting to erase my light shapes. And you begin wherever it's easiest for you to understand the light shape. Sorry, I have like too many screens in front of me and sometimes I don't remember where to look for my reference. So as I'm erasing, I'm very conscious to maintain this angular approach because, you know, I said you want to create good shapes, not bad shapes. If I don't erase in this angular manner, which might seem a little bit too robotic for some, then I lose the structure and everything will look soft and like he's made out of dough. And we don't need that. We want structure. We want this to be a believable drawing. Like, yeah, this is a real person. And at first I'm focusing on just the shape of the shadows. And later on, in another phase of the drawing, I'll focus on the lightness and darkness, if I ever get to that. Like in 10 minutes, probably not. But in one of the later drawings tonight, I'll get to it. So as I go, I'll notice things that were off. Like, oh, this angle, it's too upright. I need to slant it in more. So we're abstracting what we're seeing. So the next thing I can erase out is, notice on the baseball cap, we have a shadow pattern on the left. We have a light pattern on most of the hat. So if you squint, remember I told you today's all about squinting. Hopefully at the end of the hour, your forehead will hurt just a little bit. Not too much, just a little bit, because you've squinted so much. That's when you know you did your job right today. So I'm squinting and I'm zooming out and I'm letting my eyes dart calmly, but letting them dart around my reference, comparing. Okay, so this red hat, when I compare that as I'm squinting with his skin, is it the same or is it different? And I'll give you a super easy trick. If you ever feel like, well, I don't know, it's red, it's like messing with me, you know, like I can't decide, like I just, you know, I'm having a brain freeze about this. The way you can get around a brain freeze if you don't know if one thing is lighter or the other thing is lighter is you cancel out the color. So if you're out drawing a landscape, let's say, bring some colored sunglasses with you. If you have snowboarding goggles, they're often tinted really strongly. Or you can just go to the art supply store and buy yourself a red piece of acetate. But yeah, even just like tinted sunglasses will do the trick, and what they will do is they'll cancel out the color and they'll leave you with a value, and then you can decide. So see, I'm starting to pull this more and more together. So again, I started general with my biggest silhouette shapes, biggest shadow shapes, and then I'm gradually getting smaller. And the key here is gradually. So you don't want to hop from like your biggest shapes into your very tiniest shapes. You want to hop from your bigger shapes to your slightly smaller, and then ever so slightly smaller until you, after a couple of, I don't know, after an hour or so, you get to the smallest little shapes, like the nostril shapes and stuff like that. So you want to work your way up to that. And what I like to do, and this is usually what my students hate, is after I have my next pass, so I call these passes, I use my hands or again my paper towel, and I lightly, and again not rubbing, but I lightly just kind of dust this. And it pulls it together, it unifies the drawing. So there is a back and forth in this technique. And this technique, I've learned it from one of my favorite teachers. His name is Ron Brown. And he always said there is a balance between building and creating and destroying. And you're not destroying for the sake of destruction, you're just destroying as a chance to get another pass at it while you still have some stuff left. I don't know if that makes sense, but I hope it does. So you begin and then you tear it down, but not all the way, just enough so you feel like you now have the chance to make some improvements without feeling, oh, I put all this effort into it and it's looking so good. So I wanted to do the first one very briefly. I'm going to add another 2 minutes or so to it. So at this point, I've mainly been erasing for a while, right? So now I'm coming back, I'm squinting, not crazy hard, but squinting enough to see, okay, within the shadows, where do I see dark accents? And I think this is where people feel always a little bit like they took the training wheels off of their bike too abruptly. You know, they feel like they need those grid lines to show them where the proportions are supposed to be. But yeah, this is basically you're just abstracting things into shapes. And it's a really good thing to train. Because even if you're thinking to yourself, well, I hate painting, I don't have any intentions of painting ever, and I really enjoy drawing in line, I would still encourage you to practice this. It's an exercise. Like, this is not so you can have a finished piece of art. like all of my drawing sketch sessions with you on YouTube, they're aimed to give you a chance to practice something, practicing without being precious about the outcome. And so the benefit of this exercise, even if you usually really enjoy drawing with line, is that it'll make your shapes so much better. It'll make your 2D structure that you create through line so much more convincing. It'll fine-tune your eye to perceive shapes better. Okay, so you see how this is starting to kind of grow, and what's what I'm looking for? I don't know. Can't think of the word right now. It's basically coming together more and more. I'm going to move on to the next image and give ourselves some more time. So if you've only been watching so far, definitely practice along on the next one. So reach over here and I'm just trying to make it just the right size, if it'll let me. There we go. All right, profile. Haven't done a profile in a while. So again, let me just show you, if you're using a pencil, this is how I would use my pencil if I was you. I'd use the long edge here and see how I'm getting already a massing mark. So rather than using the tip of my pencil like this, I use my pencil like this. So, and this can be done with a graphite pencil just as well as with a charcoal pencil. Okay, so let's dive in. So let me just take a look at the time. Okay. And then we'll do the last one for quite a while, so you can hopefully see a big bring it to a resolution. You can see me bring the drawing to a resolution in the last drawing. So again, I'm beginning just with the silhouette, and I'm doing my best to stay general, to stay not detailed, stay away from the details, stay away from all the different twists and turns that I might be seeing in the hat. And that is, believe it or not, the hardest part. We always, for some reason, I don't know why that is, but we always act as if putting details on is the thing to be celebrated, the thing that's the hardest. And sure, you know, in our fast-paced culture, there's a lot to be said if you have the patience and the nuance to put in those details. Don't want to knock them for sure, but you want to put those details on a good enclosing entirety. So I might have mentioned before, there's a German art word for that called Gestalt. So that means just the entirety, but that word has kind of seeped into art terminology. But I think Americans will say Gestalt. Okay, so here's my first pass at my silhouette. And again, I have to train myself just as much as you, and this is the exercise part about this, to squint and zoom out. And so if you look at my fingers right now, so I'm looking up and down. So my reference is above me, my drawing is here, so I'm flicking my eyes up and down. Reference, drawing, reference, drawing, as I'm squinting. And doing that allows you to see where you've gone wrong. We usually just kind of glance real quickly, you know, almost afraid to find anything that's wrong at the reference, and then mainly stare at our drawing. And I know exactly why we're doing it. It's because we don't want to face our own shortcomings. I mean, who does, you know? but it's something we have to train. Okay, so I did my first pass, right? I did my first silhouette, and now I'm looking for darker shapes within. So for example, the underside of the bill. Then the hair, and see the local value of the hair is darker. So if you don't know what local value is, check out one of the previous videos where I talked about that in detail. And see how clunky that shape is that I'm drawing for the eye? It doesn't have to be perfect, and it's actually the good thing, because what will happen is we'll erase those shapes to become more specific later on, and it'll actually make the whole drawing feel more unified rather than this piecemeal. So again, if you're feeling like these inner aversions arise, like, I can't get detailed enough, this is just so clumsy and I hate this. If you have any of those thoughts, I hope you can trust me that this is actually a good thing that we can't control the shapes early on. I mean, we can, but like not to the degree that our perfectionist selves, the aspect in us, would like it to be. The other thing that I love about this method is just it's so, like, you can be so expressive with it. Like once you kind of get how this works, you can be really expressive with your mark making, and it's just so much fun. Okay, so here's that cast shadow from the color. And I see, again, so for this, I'm making myself zoom out and squint. So I'm seeing the whole head in one glance, and I'm asking myself, where is the light mass in this? And so you can see right here on the cheek and behind the ear, that's where the light falls, right? So I don't want to get too dark with my shadows. Now I'm going to use my muted eraser at first. Doing this a little bit. Now I'm going to come in here and erase those light masses. And I have this cast shadow coming off the earlobe there. It's interesting. And again, you want to allow your mind, your observation, to fall into this abstract conversation that you're having. What kind of shape is this? How long is this? How narrow is this compared to the shape next to it? Which one is bigger? Which one is leaning more? So descriptive, not judgmental. See, I'm noticing now, I didn't give myself enough space here. So let's grow this shape more. Light on the hair here. And if you do work in this method with this powdery charcoal, be advised, it ends up on your fingers, and if you touch your face after that, it'll end up on your face. So it's always good to check in the mirror before you go back out into public. It happens to me all the time. I don't know what it is about college students most of them won't say anything. Maybe they're like, oh, let's let her have, let's let her be the laughing stock. Or they're just too shy to let me know. But there's been many occasions where I'm running around with charcoal smudges in my face. In times of the pandemic, maybe that's a good way to control touching your face. Okay, so I have the light hitting the hair. Then I have, and again, I'm squinting crazy hard, so hard that I don't see any of the details in the ear. And I have the light coming down behind his ear. The earlobe is casting this shadow here. And I have these little shapes of light here. Okay, so that's basically just that super abstract pattern I'm recording. It looks like, I don't know, a gigantic ear right now. It looks like nothing, you know? So I'm not done yet though. Like whenever your drawing looks like crap, like just tell yourself, I'm not done yet. Like hold on. Like stop judging me, I'm not finished. So here I'm kind of making the background darker than I see it, just so I can use it to get more structure into this. Coming back to the lights, erase some lights here. So the tendency is to want to judge the degree of value. And what I mean by that is like how light or dark something is. But that's not what I'm interested in this phase. In this phase, I'm interested in the shape pattern. So basically the question is, what kind of puzzle piece am I holding? And then once I have the puzzle piece, the right shape of the puzzle piece, then I will assign a value to it. You see the difference? I mean, of course, I'm trying to get like the difference between, okay, this is light and this is dark, but I'm not futzing around right now with like, oh, how dark is this in comparison with a face? Not until I have most of my puzzle pieces. So it's just how I use the charcoal in the background to carve out the edges. I'm using the eraser to carve out the front edges. And when you do this, when you erase, let's say the front edges, try not to leave it like this where you just have like this fat white line. You want to erase it into a shape. Otherwise it just looks like he has a big halo around him. Okay. Getting into slightly smaller shapes. And again, I'm not gonna go to a finish with this one or near a finish with this one. The last image that I'll pull up, I'll give us more time. So now I'm going to work on that hair because I know that the hair's local value is darker than the skin. Dealing with that briefly. Again, to do that, I'm noticing what is the shape in between the corner of the eyebrow and the beginning of the hair. So I'm not thinking in terms of names, I'm thinking in terms of shapes. So let me see if I can use my pencil eraser here. So those are great if you just need some more precise shapes erased. You can do most of the things with a kneaded eraser, but if you need a highlight, or if you've gotten pretty dark someplace, these guys will come to your rescue. And there are even these battery-powered erasers that will jolt the class back awake if somebody pulls it out. All right, so I'll have to let this one go for now. Again, this is midway. Excuse me, it's midway. It's not finished. Let's get to the last image and we'll work on that one for 25 to 30 minutes. Make this bigger. Make it just a little bit bigger. There, looks good. All right, so this one's gonna be a challenge because he has a tilt, but we can handle this. If stuff like that challenges you, again, there's another episode, another sketch session we had a while back where we talked about low angles. Okay. And I'm forcing myself to squint right now because there's so much happening in this picture. You know, you see so many smaller shapes. Lighting there's a lot of variation in the lighting. So where do you begin? You begin with like this oval-like, I like to think of it as a guitar pick, rounded top, straighter edge for the side of the face, guitar pick shape. And then because he has a hat, why do you have to wear a hat? We add the shape of the hat, include that into the silhouette, and we don't overthink it. So again, I'm squinting crazy hard. So as we're drawing, if you have questions that come up, like maybe you had the same materials that I'm using and you're practicing along and you know you're encountering some struggles, some questions, be sure to put them in the chat before we end so I can address it, so I'll give you a little bit of feedback or if any other questions come up. Or if you have suggestions for what to draw in a future sketch session. Next week is already planned out. Next week we're doing some elephants and we'll do complete opposite. We're gonna do linear, gestural, expressive animal drawings. Gotta keep you on your toes, right? Okay, so I'm gonna talk to myself here. So I'm looking at the angles of the face. I see an upright angle from brow to cheek. I see a slanted angle from cheek to chin. Because that's what makes a good shape. So here, I didn't get a chance to elaborate on this too much. Here's a bad shape. This is a bad shape. Everything is kind of ovally and round. A good shape pays attention to where things change direction. It doesn't have to have a million angle changes. The fewer the better in the beginning, but it is very exact about where these are called apices, where the apex is, the direction change. So here, this is perfect. Notice how there is this sliver of a shape in between the bill and the brow. So rather than focusing on the hat and just kind of obsessing over the hat itself, don't even look at the hat. Look at the space in between the hat and the forehead. So that's called the negative space. So again, one of those artist ninja tricks that we pull out to abstract things more effectively. Always drawing relationships. How much higher is this corner of the hat to that corner of the hat? So you can cheat a little bit. So for example, you can find the angle, and then if you like that angle, you can pull down and create the shape from, coming off of it. I'll give you that. How's that for a compromise? So the kind of paper, I didn't mention that earlier, the kind of paper I'm using is just newsprint, but newsprint comes in different surface textures. It comes in a rough surface texture and a smooth surface texture. So for this method, you definitely want to have a smooth surface texture. The thing about newsprint is that it's cheap, so you don't get precious about your practice drawings. You know, if they don't turn out great, oh well, paper wasn't expensive. But if the end result is great, the paper will fall apart on you fairly quickly. It yellows and kind of disintegrates pretty quickly. But I don't, you know, that's why you have practice drawings where you just don't have an emotional attachment to them. And once you've mastered this technique and you're like, I want to do like, you know, a real artwork in this method, then I recommend using marker paper. There's like a slick marker paper that is archival, meaning it won't disintegrate, and it'll let you create these valley gradations, and so on. Okay, so I've kind of gotten ahead of myself here. I'm not too bad, but I did my silhouette, and then I did my next pass where I kind of created the darker shapes. The smaller, darker shapes, that is. And I haven't done any of my unifying yet. So let me do that. Again, lightly, it's really just to pull the tones together a little bit. It's especially useful if you have been erasing a lot, like if you've been working on your lights and it starts to look like everything is pulling apart too much. Doing this kind of wiping will do a lot to reunify your drawing. When you're using a kneaded eraser, what will happen is that your eraser will get saturated with charcoal and you have to keep re-kneading it. And so that will clean it. It will give you a cleaner surface again. And at the same time, you can also use the eraser once it has some pigment on it, not clean it, and draw with it. So let's take some here. You see how I just made this mark because I had a bunch of pigment on it. So the eraser can be used subtractively or as another way to add tone. And as with everything, there's so many different types of kneaded erasers. Different brands will give you different results. I can't remember which brand it is, but there's one brand of kneaded erasers. I want to say it's the Faber-Castell, but I don't want to slander them falsely. But there's one type that gets so soft that it's almost like holding chewing gum, and it gets stuck on the page, and it's just really not the way it's supposed to go with these. So that's why I made my first point in tonight's presentation to test your tools out, making sure that you understand how they behave. Okay, so I'm squinting crazy hard. I'm noticing a shadow pattern on his jaw and cheek area. And I'm not looking at the subtlety of the values. I'm not looking at the value of the values. I'm only looking at the shapes of those light values. The puzzle piece shape, not the lightness or darkness of it. Not yet. Not yet. Definitely didn't give him enough chin. I'll have to restructure that. By the way, if you have friends who have an amazing face, like either really intriguing facial structure or just, interesting to look at, and if you know that they would like to be drawn, submit some photos. I would love to get to draw some of the people that you know, and all you have to do is send me an email for that. If hopefully you're on my email list like that, you have my email, and to get on my email list, you just look in the description below this stream. There's like this little arrow you can click that says description, and it kind of drops down the description for this video. There are 2 hyperlinks you can follow, and either one of those 2 will get you on my email list. You can get like a freebie for it. Either get a workbook on how to make your drawings better with 3 simple questions, or if you opt for the other one, you can get a tool guide on pen and ink tools. So you pick the one that sounds good to you if you're not already on the email list. Get on the email list, and if you want to submit some of your friends as portrait models, of course only with their consent. I don't want to get into copyright issues here. Then that'd be fun. Drawing people you know, not just people I know. Keeping an eye on the time, so let's give ourselves 10 more minutes. Not liking this chin yet. I feel like the angle is off here. Now I'll give you a limitation of the newsprint paper. So the plus of it, the good thing about this newsprint paper is that it's smooth, makes it really easy to keep erasing, makes it easy to build different gradations, transitions from light to dark. The limitation is that you can't build your darks very well. Like it gets saturated really quickly. And so that's what a paper that gives you more grit does better. So if you've ever wondered why the hell are there so many different types of paper at the art supply store, now you might get a little taste for the reason. Because every paper does something else. I want to bring that cheek out a little bit more. Okay, so this is usually how far we've gotten to this point, you know, like a couple of passes, nowhere near finish. So I'm gonna unify this thing one more time and then we'll get into some smaller shapes. I'm looking at the light pattern on the hat. So earlier in the presentation, I said the last point when you work in this method is that you want to have edge variety. So that might not mean anything to you. So I wanted to explain a little bit more about what I mean. So in this method, you're probably noticing, wow, there's a lot of softness, a lot of smudginess. It feels very doughy, just hazy, and that can add a beautiful element. Like it can add this beautiful atmospheric quality that I love about this. But if everything is hazy, it'll become too smudgy, amorphous, unstructured, call it what you will. So you want to find a nice balance where you have these soft qualities, meaning soft edges, and you want to vary that with areas where you have sharper, crisper edges. So how do you get your edges to be sharper or crisper in this method when your kneaded eraser is so soft and squishy and your charcoals are so soft and squishy? Well, first of all, if you're erasing, maybe begin erasing with a finer point. But then at one point or another, you're also allowed to switch into a pencil, not to outline things, but to what I call close off an edge. So notice how here right now, let's make this even softer. This is a fairly soft edge to this shadow this shadow shape here. I'm going to close this edge off. And the way I do that is I begin with a line, but I don't leave the line. I'm then absorbing this line into my shape. And now this has become a crisper edge. You can even come at it from the other side too. If there are any shading tendrils that have stuck out beyond it, so that you want to have a variation between sharper edges like this, and more softer diffused edges. So that's what I meant. And so this is something I'll be doing in the last moments of this drawing. There was a sketch session that we did on shadow mapping. I would go and watch that if you haven't seen it yet, because there I talk in detail about when do you need crisp edges, when do you need soft edges. You see lines here. And this is where style comes in. You know, some people, they play with that and they make that like a visual conflict almost, where it's like they leave that line sitting on that shadow shape. And others prefer this seamless tone only look. You get to decide, what do you prefer? What are you into? What resonates with you? There's not one way that's out there prescribed for all people. This hat bugs me. I did that wrong earlier. I'm just going to pretend like there's a black background to make that correction, because my paper doesn't allow me to erase it all out. So, for example, in that eye area, tendency is for people to just draw the eyebrow shape, but you also want to squint and ask yourself, well, that little shadow shape in there, if I had to cut that out, what would that look like? Yeah. So if you have an area that has a darker mid-tone, so for example, the chin area or the nose area, for different reasons, are darker than, let's say, this top of the cheek here, right? Top of the cheek is very bright because it catches the light very directly. This here is a little bit darker because it has lots of blood in it, so it's as a darker local value. This here is darker because the light doesn't reach there as directly. There's some fall off happening. So if you want to bring in that value but not lose the fact that this is light, use your fingers or, you know, a paper towel. You know, some teachers will cringe if they hear me say that, but like, you know, you can pick up some charcoal on a paper towel, kind of basically add some of that without it being so drastic. And you're still thinking in terms of planes. So planes that are angling away from the light are darker. Planes that are angling up at the light are lighter. Of course, you know, with him, we have a little bit of a tricky situation because you can see the beginning of a beard coming in. So you have this kind of grayness in certain areas that isn't really a shadow. It's just kind of like a color variation. I'm trying to make this whole, the neck and lower jaw area darker than the cheek area, right? Because the cheek area, that's actually being hit by light. So I just want to prepare you just a few more minutes. If you did have a question come up, make sure to put it in the chat. If you're watching the recording after the fact, just put it as a comment. And do comment or answer any comments that are being posted, even after the live is already over. So as the nostril is kind of curling and tucking under, it rolls into shadow here. So I'm trying to get that to happen. So here, let me do one last thing, one last closing off of an edge. So you see how my nose is pretty fuzzy, the edge of my nose. So I'm going to draw the contour. I'm not going to outline it fat. I'm just going to draw the edge here. And now I'm going to absorb this line that just appeared into this shadow here. And so now I have a cleaner edge there. And I could just keep going with this forever, keep working on this, making this into a full-fledged portrait. But again, we're just practicing here, we're just exercising. If you're ever interested in going through the whole process, keep an eye open for any upcoming classes. They're much more in-depth demos where we go actually to the finish of things. And if you don't want to miss any of that, get on my email list so you get to be among the first to grab a spot in any upcoming classes. Okay, all right, I'm gonna leave it at that. Let me switch over here. All right, I hope I don't have a ton of charcoal smudges in my face. I hope this was fun for you to learn maybe a new method. Maybe you've worked this way before. Maybe this was an old hat for you and you got to revisit it. Let's recap briefly before we jump off. Number one, if you work tonally, you gotta know your tools. So you gotta test them out. It doesn't have to be a portrait test. You can just make little smudges and see what happens if I use this tool with this paper. How does it look if I erase? Will it let me erase? How about this tool and this paper? How about this tool and that paper? And make little notes to yourself, because you know we do forget usually. And having that in your sketchbook maybe stored away might be a really valuable thing. So next time you're at the art supply store, you know which combo to get. So know your tools before you start this process. The paper to mark making relationship has to be dialed in. Number 2, forget that there are lines. In this method, you're not working with lines. You're only working in shapes. And to see shapes, physically squint and zoom out. Look back and forth a lot between your reference and your drawing board while squinting, while being zoomed out, not zoomed in onto just a little area. The blurring of the eyes cancels out the details. That's why that works. And as you're creating these shapes, you're beginning with a big silhouette. Be very descriptive in your mind. What kind of a shape is it? Is it an upright shape? Is it a leaning shape? Is it tapering? Is it tapering evenly? Or is one side tapering differently than the other? So you want to have a roster of notes to check as you're creating your shapes. And create good shapes. You stay away from curves. You angle things out. You will erase your lights, also in a shape-based manner. And you go general to specific, biggest shapes to smaller and smaller. And the beautiful thing about this method is that you can make it look atmospheric, hazy. You do that by wiping gently and unifying your drawing. And as you do so, things become blurry and soft. So as you're ending, as you're coming to the finish of your drawing, you want to bring out a variety of sharp edges and soft and hazy edges. So it doesn't, so it's not the same all over and become boring, but that there is a push and pull between sharp and soft. All right, well, that's all I got for you. Next week, as I said, we will be drawing animals, elephants, with a linear gestural expressive method. So if you're excited for a change of pace, join me for that. And if you've been drawing and you liked what you did, post it on Instagram, tag me at Kira Studios so I can give you a virtual high five. And I can't wait to see you soon. Oh, and I never do this, but if you liked it, give me a thumbs up. It helps other people find this video. Okay, talk to you soon. See you next time.